Now, we set some targets last week at the global platform which are extremely ambitious. We said we would try to reduce the deaths from natural disasters by half by 2015. We may or may not achieve that, but the point is it is achievable, even if the number of disasters and the severity of those disasters is rising at the same time, and Bangladesh has demonstrated that. We also set targets about safer schools and safer hospitals and better education for everybody in their primary school curricula, in particular, about the need to prepare for natural disasters. The broader point than that, I will conclude here, is that adaptation to climate change, I'm not saying it's as important as mitigation as actual prevention of climate change, but it is extremely important. We need to make sure it's not neglected in the negotiations before and at Copenhagen. We also need to make sure that there is proper financing for that adaptation, which comes not only from governments spending more, and now that's where most of the money will have to come from, but also the international community through percentages of ODA, but also some kind of automatic financing mechanism through taxation on trading of emissions licenses or carbon taxation or whatever it might be. There needs to be some resource which generates the funds that are going to be needed to address these problems in the future. So let me stop there.
John, thank you so much. So a really ambitious target there from John Holmes, who I think is trying to make sure that OCHA no longer has a function looking way out into the future. But the money will be needed. There are tremendous lessons that have been learned. Can they be applied more widely? Well, joining us from Ghana is Mary Chinery-Hesse, who has not got direct experience of cyclones, but who has worked in emergency responses in a big way, dealing with something completely unexpected, huge flooding in the north of the country. One of those global weirdness examples that I was talking to you about earlier. Let's hear now from Mary Chinery-Hesse.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, friends, Your Excellencies. It's very nice to be talking after people who have really been fighting very big issues in terms of disasters. But I guess everything is a question of degree. And we have had a little experience in Ghana. It wasn't exactly a cyclone or anything. But in 2007, we had a really trying period as a country. The year started with extreme drought in the northern regions of the country, and this happens to be the home of the poorest people. So their already fragile livelihood was severely threatened as their farms were scorched. The country, in turn, experienced a crippling crisis as cheaper option of hydro generation of electricity was affected. The major river we use comes through the north. So because of the drought, then it meant we had to go into a regime of load shedding and so on. And resources were diverted to try and bring in thermal generation, which wasn't exactly very good for the environment, but we had no choice. And then ironically, in the middle of that year, for the same region, the rains descended. And we had unprecedented flooding. Of course, as normal, we declared an emergency, and people started thinking that something was really going wrong. The government used the opportunity to start educating the population about climate change, which I cannot say was very high on the agenda, because when you have so many challenges as a country related to food, to housing, to education, etc., certain topics which are very, very critical to your life appear very abstract. So this was a good opportunity for that. But what happened then was that the people were put at risk immediately. There were threats to health and nutrition, People lost their savings and all their assets. There was damage to property. There was destruction of crops in an already very poor and area of the country which had this particular difficulty. And I want to say here, therefore, that in terms of coping, poor people have a bigger problem. They are forced, they do not have private insurance normally for these things, and I think it's a matter we're taking up here at some other level. But they're forced to sell off assets, to draw on their savings, if they have them. But poor people, when they don't have them, then have to reduce consumption. It's their nutrition which is affected. They have to take children out of school, and they have to sell productive assets, on the very assets on which their recovery may depend, like selling off cows and so on, in order to be able to withstand the disaster. I just want to say, though, that what came out clearly was the very strong social safety net we have in Ghana. In fact, John, this might interest you, but the international community came down and they expected to see people in tent cities, etc. And they didn't see these. And therefore they asked us, where is the disaster? You know, because they had certain perceptions of what a disaster would look like. What actually happened was the coping mechanism of the society itself, the people. They taking those who were affected into their homes. And therefore, where you should have 5 people sleeping in a room, you had 20. But when you went into the street, you didn't find anybody who appeared to be displaced. And we had to explain this to them. It showed a certain, yes, please.
About strangers were taking in people they didn't know, or are we talking about family members? Can you explain that to us?
Once you live in a society, like in a village, there's no concept of stranger. Anybody who walks into villages in Ghana gets integrated very quickly. So it was not just family members who were being taken in, but everybody took in everybody else. These are elements of our culture. Whatever happens, we should seek not to lose. I want to make that clear. But it also says that you cannot have one way of looking at disasters globally. You need to have differentiated lenses, which will take into account the social setting of the particular place, and which also says that you need to rely a lot on local knowledge. So the other thing is a lot of people walking from outside, sometimes with set prescriptions and so on. We should learn to listen a lot more to local people, even as we tackle disasters. And I do not want to go on for very long. Maybe during the question and answer time, I'll be able to bring out some of the lessons which we picked up from this particular experience. Number one, I have highlighted the sensitization opportunity which was offered to us. The second point was what I perceived, because I had worked with the UN for so long on the one side, and now being faced with handling things from the national level, was a certain degree of competition among those who had come to help us, in a manner that it was difficult for us to drive the process. For example, I found that there were very set packages, if I might call it so, which some relief organizations offer. If they specialize in tents,